Hello and welcome to the Divorce to Bliss podcast. Here you will learn all things related to healing from divorce, mind, body, and spirit, so you can create a beautiful new life filled with happiness. I'm Rachel Ruby, author of Divorce to Bliss, divorce coach, speaker, and attorney, and I'm so glad you found me here. Hello and welcome to the Divorce to Bliss podcast. Today we are going to be talking about integrative healing, which is healing from the inside out. And we are specifically going to be focusing on feminine embodiment and finding your feminine so that you can heal from divorce. My guest today is Dr. Elizabeth Willis, PhD. And Dr. Willis is a seasoned educator and speaker. She fuses her academic background with experience in education and uses somatic bodywork, sexual development, and cutting-edge spiritual principles to mentor others, specifically focusing on ambitious women over 40 to find fulfillment and balance in dating through pleasure refinement, nervous system regulation, and more in order to navigate the dating world with confidence, clarity, and authenticity. I'm so excited to have her here today to kind of fuse this scientific and spiritual these pathways into dating. So welcome, Dr. Willis.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for having me. I am really thrilled for this conversation. I know from our brief conversation that we had over the phone that we have a lot of layers and a lot of yummy topics to dive into.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, let's get started. I'm so excited to ask you all these questions. I almost feel like we need a double or triple length podcast. So let's start with something that I haven't really delved into with other guests. So again, this is going to be fun for me. And that is the inner child. And I'm going to kind of divide the question into four parts. So I'm going to state them here and I'll just let you take off. Okay. Because I know this is okay. So first of all, for those who don't know, what is the inner child? What is our inner child? And what happens to her when we go through a trauma like divorce? What can happen or what tends to happen? And why is it so important for us to let her out, so to speak? And then finally, how do we do that? So I'm turning the mic over to you to guide us through this.
Okay, so I'm going to answer that question indirectly. So the nervous system is a piece in our bodies that is a very, very important muscle piece of machinery that we really know very little about, yet it drives our everyday experience. Mm-hmm. And it is built upon our primal aspects of survival. And if we look back in prehistoric times, we were designed to keep ourselves safe. We were designed to keep ourselves safe from predators, lions, bears. And so we have 4 different survival systems that kick into place to keep us alive. And they are fight and flight. Then you have freeze, and they've added a new one, which is fawn, or really kind of like people pleasing. Mm-hmm. And so what has been adapted over so many years is that the fight and flight response, or even the freeze response, when you feel as though you're being attacked, if you were in prehistoric times, has now turned into receiving emails, getting to work on time, sending a text message and not getting a message back. Everyday stressors have put us into fight and flight or freeze and then the fawn response. And so really we move through life trying to adapt and trying to create changes from the mind, which are all beautiful. Mindset work is amazing. Meditation is amazing. All of these pieces are super helpful for us because it changes our beliefs. But we can't really make sustainable change in our body until we understand our own nervous system regulation capacity and how our nervous system acts. And everyone has their own nervous system. Everyone has a unique nervous system. And there's so much research out there and so much information. And if the one takeaway that you take away from this podcast is to go understand your nervous system, I would be just honored, because it is really, truly a life-changing understanding. Mm. So you asked about the inner child. So when we are younger and we're growing up, we experience different traumas. And it could be a big trauma where we experience assault or sexual molestation, or it could be more of a small trauma. It affects our nervous system in a very similar way, dependent upon what the state of our nervous system is as a child in that moment. And so if, for example, you were going to or say, for example, you had a performance, right, at school, and dad was supposed to show up and mom was supposed to show up. It was an end of the year performance. You were 7 years old and you're standing on stage and you're nervous anyway. So your nervous system is activated. It's out of like a regular regulated state, because you're on stage and you look around and you don't see your dad, and your dad's not here. And so what you feel is this sensations that are associated with the feeling of abandonment. But because we are so connected as children to our feelings, to our emotional body, the sensations become very overwhelming. That's why toddlers have tantrums, because it's overwhelming. What they're feeling in their body is overwhelming for them to process. They can't process the information logically like an adult can, because they don't have that ability to do so. Mm-hmm. So what happens is that experience is then embedded into your nervous system, and it's embedded into part of your survival mode. And so if we look at the survival modes, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, that feeling of abandonment is something that is like deeply buried. Like, I don't want to feel this feeling again. And so your fight and flight specifically response kicks in relationships. It kicks in many different experiences where it perceives that abandonment might be felt again. Okay. And so the fight and flight response, or the nervous system responses, keep your body protected so that you don't have to feel a feeling that's happened in the past. Okay. And so that is the experience that happened to that little child, that happened to your inner girl. And so I'm now forgetting your questions, but I'm just going to keep going. So okay. When we get to know our inner child, and there's many different ways that we can get to know our inner child. And I like to divide it into my inner child and my inner teen, because those two symbolize very different experiences and very different needs. Okay. So if we go back to that little girl on stage, she needed her dad to show up. It was important, right, that she had that consistency, that she saw her father, because he represented safety, stability, right, love to her. Right. And so when you get to know your inner child, you get to know what your core needs are and what your core, I would say, non-negotiables are. Mm-hmm. Right. And so when you get to know what she needs, then as an adult, you get to choose how you're going to take care of the child. Yeah. So then you can take care of the child. Okay, if I take care of the child, say I have had a divorce and I'm going to go start dating again, and I haven't gotten to know my inner child, but then I'm out on a date and everything's going well. And then I come back and I don't hear from him the next day, and he doesn't check in with me, and I don't hear from him, the next day or the next day or the next day. And feeling of abandonment that you had felt when your father didn't show up at the show start to come back. But because your nervous system has spent a lifetime in suppressing that feeling so you don't feel it, it sends you into your fight and flight survival mode, which fight and flight usually looks like anxiety. You can lash out in anger and frustration. Those are usually the signs of that fight and flight. The freeze is more like overwhelm and disconnect, where the fight and flight is more forward energy. Right. So if you're not able to track this, right, you're not able to know what your inner child needs, that little girl inside of you needs to feel safe and stable with consistent showing up and consistent communication. So when you get to know what your inner child needs before you date, then you can go into the dating experience. You can have the date. You can express with effective communication during the date. One of my core needs is communication. Communication, I feel safe and stable with communication. Can we check in tomorrow? Can we have a check-in tomorrow? Just maybe a 5-minute talk to see how we're feeling, right? And if that person who you're on the date with says, yes, no problem, that's great, and then you have that, hopefully that will follow through and you'll have that conversation. If that person says, maybe can't give you an answer, doesn't want to commit, that is a sign that this person is not really safe for your inner child. So it's your job to get to know your inner child so that you can keep them safe. And it's not always outsourcing, like putting it on the other person, because again, you're learning about your nervous system patterns and you learn techniques to regulate those pieces. I'm going to stop right there.
I mean, this is so fascinating to me. And it's just one of those things from a spiritual perspective that seems to make so much sense, but you're breaking it down into an actual scientific perspective as well, which I think is just, I don't know. I mean, I could sit through a whole lecture on this. This is really great. How do we find out then what our inner child needs?
Okay, good question.
Yeah.
So to go into the spiritual way, I like to create a space. So I have an altar in my room, in my bedroom, and I have a picture of my inner child, or my child, myself as a child, and I have a picture of myself as a teenager. And I have taken the time with both of those pictures and journaling to kind of connect to what the essence was. And when I look at the picture of myself when I was a little child, it's like me climbing in a tree. And so what comes is like playfulness and curiosity and excitement and dirt and adventure.
And nature.
And nature. Right?
Yeah, which is so important. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And then I can look at that picture, and while I'm journaling and getting to know her essence, it's like, I'm like, okay, what did she need? What did she need to hear from, my mother and my father when she was a child? What perhaps did she need to hear that she didn't hear? And so tuning into that and then providing that for myself, right, as the adult, because it is a part of me. So I'm bringing her closer to me.
Right.
So that extensive journaling, and really it's like you develop a relationship with your inner child as well as with my inner teen. I have a picture of me as a teenager. And when I tune into the essence of that picture, it's a completely different need and a completely different essence than my child. And so you really develop a relationship with them. So they're kind of like with you all the time. Right. It's not something and that's how you kind of bring it into your body. It comes out of like this thing that you do, and it becomes more of, and you embody it. It becomes more part of you.
Wow. I think that is so helpful. I've done a lot of work on my inner child and my, I don't know what you want to call them, demons or parts that I needed to work on from when I was a child, but I've never really brought in that teenager element. So I really, that's fabulous. I'm going to do that. So thank you. That's yeah, because like you said, very different times, very different needs. You know, teenager, you're becoming a woman, or becoming a man, whatever. You are just, it's a completely different time from that very dependent child. So, really fascinating. Yeah. Can we, let's move on a little bit to, negative emotions, and specifically when we're talking about divorce and healing from divorce, there, as you can imagine, there are so many negative emotions involved. And I think that especially when it comes to body image and sexuality, I know that I experienced that. So a big part of healing, of course, is to love oneself and to learn to love oneself in all of the facets, including, you know, the inner child and who you are today and who you want to be. And so and it's okay to feel alive and sexy and beautiful after divorce. And I believe it's even necessary to feel all of these things in order to move forward. How can one learn to love herself in this way and kind of take back that feminine essence, take back that empower herself, take back that power so that she can feel sexy, feel beautiful again, and move forward?
Beautiful. So I first want to just share something with the listeners, that if you are going through divorce or have just gone through divorce, I can resonate very much with that experience. I have been through a massive divorce and separation that involved courts and trials, and it was a very deep, dark process. So I just want to say that I see you and hear you, and I understand you. And while it might feel overwhelming right now, it's like these little pieces and little steps that you just intuitively follow that kind of lead you to a place that you don't really know what it is. And then other things open up and come to you.
But knowing at the same time, even though you don't know, you may not know, creating what you want it to look like, because as we visualize what we want and ask for what we want and believe we're going to have it, we have more chance of getting there. Yeah.
And that's such a huge piece, and that worthiness piece of and getting to know what we want is also part of what you're talking about. And the question that you asked me, which I refer to as pleasure refinement, and it's about taking autonomy over your own pleasure. So there's very much this phrase of before you can love somebody else, you have to love yourself. And I remember in my early 20s, my friends would say that. I'd be like, oh, I love myself. I go and I get a massage.
Right. Right.
And, I meditate. And so, but what I really didn't understand was what my body needed. I didn't know the language of my body. So because we are in our nervous system is most likely in a state of hyperarousal most of the day, in one of those survival responses, like I mentioned before, just because we're going through the day. So that's just happening. When we are in those responses, our nervous system is not regulated. We're not at what they call the ventral vagal state, which is where you're regulated.
Right.
And so when you are in one of these hyper or hypo arousal states, you're not connected to the wisdom and the language of your body, because you're operating out of this fear-based responses from your mind.
I really like that idea of just taking a pause and feeling it and breathing into it. And it definitely teaches us to not react. Yeah. Thank you. That's a great tip. So talking about dating, and what I see in a lot of my clients is especially women who come out of the divorce, or they're going through the motions of divorce, and they've separated from their former spouse, and they are afraid. Fear just causes them to afraid of being alone, and that is, I think, one of the two biggest fears faced by most people after a divorce. And so that fear of being alone can oftentimes lead to just trying to replace that former spouse as quickly as possible so that one isn't alone without doing the work first. And again, most people, like you said, think they love themselves. But when you break it down, there's certain behaviors that show that you really don't love yourself quite like you should, or, obviously work needs to be done in order for you to get there. So when we see people going into these relationships right away, why can you explain, maybe from your perspectives or the melded perspectives of the science and the spirituality, why it's so important to focus on discovering the self first, the self now, today, and as well as the self from before, like we talked about, the inner children, but why it's important to learn to be alone and to learn to know that it's okay to be alone before getting into a relationship. And then also what tips you might have to help somebody do this.
Very beautiful. Yeah. So I like to call this piece like disentangling love from fear. Mm-hmm. So what we spoke about before in the beginning with the nervous system response, that survival mode that kept us alive, like that's a beautiful part of our physiology. Right? It's like, thank you so much for taking care of me, but I am going to choose differently from now on because I'm educating myself on the nervous system. I'm taking care of my body. I'm going to learn more about how to feel the sensations of my body. And those nervous system responses, the hyper or the hypo responses, are based in fear. And what we are looking for is we're looking for love. Like, we are love. I am love. You are love. We're like the embodiment of moving love. But it's really hard to see that. And it's hard to feel that when we are all wrapped up in judgment and all of this armor that keeps us really protected from feeling our feelings. Mm-hmm. And so when that feeling of loneliness, that fear of loneliness, which I have felt it and it is real, okay, when that comes, that will trigger your flight and fight response to do something about that, because your survival is threatened. That's like what you said, it's a basic survival lever. We are meant to be connected with other human beings. That's one of our basic wiring. So you will, when you feel that, it will trigger that response. And then, what do I have to do? I got to go on the dating app. I got to find a guy. I got to date, and so it launches you into what I like to call that old unconscious pattern. And so you're just going to go down that same road again, but you haven't felt the fear. You haven't felt the fear of loneliness. So to move through that fear of loneliness, you have to feel lonely, and you have to give yourself space to actually feel the depth of that feeling. And that feeling is like, remember I spoke about that little girl who, felt abandoned by her father. Like, that happened such a long time ago, and that's deep, deep within you. And we have so much of our survival nervous system responses protecting us from feeling that feeling. And it's through building the capacity to feel our sensations that we all of a sudden, you start to begin to feel more. So a lot of the women that I work with, once they start doing self-pleasure, what comes is just tears. And they just end up crying all the time. Like, they're in the kitchen crying. There's something wrong with me, Elizabeth. All I'm doing is crying. And I'm like, no, you're feeling like your body is opening up again. Because when we feel, we cry. We have anger move through us. And we are okay with, again, these clusters of sensations moving through our body, because we know that they're waves moving through. We don't necessarily need to make meaning out of it. So when you take care of yourself and that self-care piece, and you work on that pleasure refinement, then you don't become afraid of the loneliness because it's just a feeling. It doesn't have to be the reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you can choose differently based upon love, which is like what your heart wants, right? We, as women, especially women who have been divorced, our heart is very, very closed. And it's very, very armored. We don't trust men. We think they're going to con us. There is a lot of wounding around the masculine.
Yeah.
And to go back out into the dating world without taking responsibility for these healing pieces really sets you up for being right back in the same position because your heart is still closed.
Yeah.
And so because you are love and I am love and he is also love and we are moving embodiments of love, you can't feel the love when it's all tangled up with the fear. And it really takes it takes a lifetime to kind of disentangle this love from fear and begin to open your heart to begin to trust, love.
Yeah. I mean, that was the biggest part of my journey was opening my heart. And, what I tell a lot of my clients all my clients, the same thing is kind of what you were alluding to was the fact that when you come out of that relationship, our hearts are so closed that if we run into another relationship, we are not attracting the man or woman who we can attract once we've done that work, once we've figured out what we need, what we want our new life to look like. When we get through that, and it could take a long time. It just really depends on the work you're putting in and the demons you have to wrestle, for lack of a better word, that you need to wrestle with. But when you get there, you will be attracting a very different person. So you're not, like you just said, going to be attracting the same kind of a situation as the relationship you just came out of, that marriage. And it's so that is why being alone and learning that, like you said, it's just a feeling and it's okay is so important. And
it's so important. And it's hard because you don't want to feel like, it's almost like we have to learn how to feel again.
Yeah.
And it's a lesson to learn how to feel. It takes time to learn how to feel. And then with that feeling, then we can learn also how to be authentic, how to speak authentically, how to speak vulnerably. And that is when you lead, like you said, you lead with that when you go out dating, with that vulnerability, with that authenticity. And that's what you attract back is men. It feels good to them. They're like, they want that.
They want that. And the ones who don't want that, they are not ready and they have not done the work. And it is not a reflection on the woman who is doing the work.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you won't be interested in it. It's not, it's not something that, it's almost like you don't even see them.
Yeah. They're just, see ya. Yeah. Oh my gosh. This is also so fun. And it's so nice because, I've been teaching all of these lessons, and it's so nice to back it up with the sciencey part. I love that. There are a lot of people, like I said, who maybe don't trust the, spiritual part of things or how we do things. And so all of these lessons are so important in so many different ways that this really resonates. So thank you so much for all of your amazing advice. And I'm going to put all your information here up on the screen so anyone can contact you if they want some more help. Thank you so much. And it's been wonderful having you on the podcast.